Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of The List. Jordan joining us today is one of our favorites, the best mustache in the draft community, Mr. Kent Lee Platte. Kent, how are you doing today?
Great, man. Ready to be back on.
All right, Kent, before we get to draft stuff, I told Brett I can't get into the draft without talking about your mustache for just a hot second. So when we had you on last year, you were talking about it and the product you use and stuff like that. How long has this current iteration of the mustache been growing out? And how much longer do you want it to get?
I think I shaved it off. I had an infection on my face, which is just the greatest thing to talk about. I'm sure you guys are
Well, that's why we do it when there are two people on.
So I had some weird infection and I had to shave it off. It sucked. I hated it. And I think that was back in September, maybe. I feel like that was right before I went on hiatus because I took some time off for some medical stuff. And it's been growing ever since then. It's almost long enough. I'll just say that. Like I've been trying to do something new with it. That's why it's a little scragglier now because it's kind of getting heavy, and I haven't really done the stuff that I need to. I'm growing out two mustaches. I'm gonna have a mustache and then a mustache underneath it. But it's not quite long enough to do that. So I got to grow it out a little bit longer. I'm hoping that my post-draft stuff will have that on full display. And I'm also hoping to have the hat back. The hat, I got to get a new hat band, a new feather. But I haven't gotten around to it.
Okay, a double mustache.
Yeah.
Coming post-draft season. Brett, now I will throw it over to you for the serious portion of the proceedings here.
Okay, yeah, and Kent, like you and I were talking about before we went live, and before Jordan came back and joined us, every year it seems like people come out, have a great combine, a great Senior Bowl, they just build a momentum, and so you know what I'm talking about. It does not seem like any one player is building momentum right now, and I just thought this now. Is it because so many guys that were bigger prospects didn't work out of the combine, or you have people like I saw Will Campbell say today that he's going to sit out his pro day? But what's your opinion on that? Why do you think no one's really starting to build on hype?
I don't know. It's really weird because even on the quarterbacks, and you and I talked about that too, but like we don't have any quarterback that's really separated themselves. Cam Ward is starting to, and he had his pro day was it today or yesterday. He's starting to, but I feel like it's less him than it is. People are kind of souring on Shedeur Sanders. We don't even know why that's happening, but it seems to be a thing. Jackson Dart had a bunch of momentum after the Senior Bowl, and that pretty much died off. We don't really have anybody building on that kind of momentum. Nobody's really hyping themselves up either. The combine performances, we had a couple of guys with really big performances. We had Nick Emanwari and Shamar Stewart both had the perfect scores. But that was the last I've heard of those guys. I haven't heard anything about them. We haven't heard people hyping them up anymore or looking into them anymore. Isaiah Nair from Nebraska is another guy that tested really well, and I haven't heard anything about him at all. Normally when guys test really well, we start hearing more and more about them. But even the guys that test poorly, the Malachi Starks and Brooks, we don't hear anything about them either, like making that stuff up. It's just really weird how the narrative has been this draft season, and I'm not really sure why that is. It might just be a quiet draft season.
Yeah. Well, you're talking about the perfect scores real quick. Let's mention Dominic Morris, who got the elusive 000 on the RAS.
Yeah, I don't usually post those guys. I learned very early on, like the types of interactions that you get online when posting extremely negative content is not really the type of stuff that you want to get. But Thor had a really good write-up on that about the type of preparation, what goes into why guys test like that. He had an injury. He kind of dug into that a little bit more. We get guys like that every season. It's usually like a couple of guys from the CFL Combine or the International Combine, guys that have never prepped for the draft in their life. It might be the first time they've ever ran a 40-yard dash. Those guys happen all the time. We just never really see it. Since we started doing the data collection for RAS, we get about 2,000 to 2,500 players a year. I think 2017, I had like 2,700, something like that, some very high number. But with all that, we get a lot of guys that test poorly, and we don't talk about them because they're not really anybody that people recognize, and they're not going to get any kind of interactions other than just, oh, look at this guy with the crappy score, So it's not usually as notable. It's kind of interesting to see how Thor looked into that, though, and dug into it a little bit more. I don't usually do that kind of stuff. It's really cool to see what actually comes from it. I might try something like that in the future, but glad somebody else did it because I would have felt bad the whole time.
Yeah, that was a cool write-up. But I want to go back to the quarterback position with you for a second. Starting with Cam Ward, you alluded to it a little bit before, but do you think that Cam Ward is a number one pick quarterback prospect, or do you think it's just a weaker quarterback year? And are there any quarterbacks that kind of tested a little bit better, or have higher RAS scores than you thought they would, and you're intrigued to see what kind of NFL careers they would have outside of, let's say, the big three?
I don't know. This is a particularly weak class. It's definitely not a strong class. I'll say that. Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, I mentioned Jackson Dart, Jalen Milroe, Quinn Ewers, Will Howard, Dylan Gabriel. Those are probably your top guys for most people. But none of those guys really scream long-term starter in a manner that you're just like, yeah, that makes sense. I know it's unfair to do the Andrew Luck comparison, but even like the CJ Stroud type of guys, we don't really have that in this class. Cam Ward, maybe. It depends on how you're evaluating him, but I don't think we really have those guys that are like, yeah, this guy's going to start for a decade. I feel like we're going to get surprised by somebody in this class, though. It's just one of those classes where there's a lot of guys with at least a little bit of talent, and maybe they're a little overlooked. Kyle McCord is a guy that's been brought up a couple of times from Syracuse, where he's got a lot of traits that teams tend to like. But maybe somebody like that pops out of nowhere in the later rounds, gets a couple of starts under their belt, and really shines. This is that type of class. Like, we're looking at the guys in the later rounds that might potentially someday 1% chance do something, rather than having the conversations about the guys that are for sure going to land on a team and likely get starter reps either as a rookie or in year two.
Yeah, the guy I like in that range is Curtis Rourke. I mean, MAC Player of the Year, injury tested at Indiana, had a great year with them. Tough guy. I could see him being a backup for a while.
Yep.
Yeah, there's a lot of backup guys in this class.
Yes, for sure.
So since we're talking quarterbacks, just to give a little preview, if you're like a team like the Giants or the Raiders, are you saying, you know what, we got to take a risk on someone like Shedeur Sanders, or are you like, we're going to be bad no matter what? We have Drew Aller and a certain Texas quarterback who is going to be eligible next year, even though he hasn't played yet. Are you saying, you know what, let's just take the best player available this year, or are you gambling on a quarterback and saying Aller, Arch Manning, you got Nussmeier, Garrett Nussmeier. So you look at those three; those are probably, and we're saying that without any real tape on Arch, but
right,
those are probably the top three guys you're looking at for next year.
Yeah, and teams hate to punt, right? Teams hate to punt because the guys that are drafting this high in the draft, they're the guys whose jobs are already at risk. They're the teams that are already looking forward and going, I got to make sure I'm saving my job. But I think what that looks like is starting to change a little bit. I think the owners are starting to come around to the idea that it does take time to do rebuilds, to rebuild a roster from the bottom up. And teams are getting a little bit more savvy to that. My Detroit Lions are a great example of doing things differently. They didn't go out and grab that top tier quarterback when they could have. They had several opportunities to, and they didn't take any of them. They did trade up several times, but they traded up for a wide receiver, a running back, that type of thing. The building blocks that you put around a team. And I know I've seen a couple of articles that do the Lions blueprint thing. I'm not claiming anything like that. But I think the teams are starting to look at that and go, maybe that's not what we really need to do, is grab a quarterback and then build around him and throw everything in there. They're starting to look at the run game is starting to improve league wide. We're starting to see some of that stuff coming back. The NFL is a cyclical league. Every trend will go away and come back in several years. And I feel like we're at that point where that building through the run game and through the trenches, not the trenches just as in rushing the passer and keeping guys from hitting the passer, but actually building around the run game and trying to do things that way. We're starting to see more of that. You're going to see more running backs go high than I think you have in a while. You're probably going to see a whole lot of offensive linemen off the board early, but I don't think that teams are going to reach on quarterbacks as much as they have been. Both the Giants and the Raiders are the teams that are likely to grab a guy like Shedeur. I think both of them will consider him very highly. But I would also not be surprised if both of them passed on him and we saw a fall.
You brought up running back. Do you think there's something I'm starting to see now? Do you think 2 running backs go into top 12 this year?
Maybe not in the top 12, but top 20, I would say, is almost a certainty for me anyway right now. The running back class is very strong. This is one of the strongest running back classes we've had in a long time. It doesn't have an Adrian Peterson or a Saquon Barkley type of guy outside of Jonty. But behind him, you have Omarion Hampton, Caleb Johnson, Quinton Judkins, guys like that, and even guys like Cam Scatabo, who's just a lot of fun, or Bashal Tutin, who has a lot of incredible traits and is one of the most explosive players we've seen this year, but maybe has some fumbling issues. And then we've got 2 really strong power backs in Ollie Gordon and Damian Martinez. This is a really strong running back class, and a lot of teams are looking for a 1-2 punch. They're trying to do that, and we used to call it a committee. I don't think we can even really call that. We need a better term for it now, because it really has gotten to the point where it's 1A, 1B. You have 2 guys that you're using. It's entirely situational. It's not based on this is our starter and this is our slightly good, still good, but slightly less good backup that we're going to give a bunch of snaps to. These are 2 extremely talented guys at what they do, and we're going to use them in those situations whenever they're called for. You're going to see that a lot more, I feel.
Brett and I were talking about last episode about the Dolphins, and you talk about multiple running backs. We were talking about how the Dolphins play A-Chan a lot as more of an offensive weapon type player. So you could almost make an argument that you almost need 3 running backs to run the Dolphin system, because if you're going to use A-Chan at receiver, sometimes you need 2 guys that you feel comfortable putting back there. But you weren't as high on the quarterback position. Is there a position in this draft where you're like, all right, this is a position that a lot of teams can fill needs, and there are a lot of players that can make an impact right away?
Yeah, and I already mentioned running back as that position. I'm really low, not really low. I'm fairly low on the quarterback class. I'm pretty low on the tight end class. I came into the combine expecting a lot and got very little from the tight end class. I was really hopeful that this was going to be a strong class. I love when there's a strong tight end class.
Brett just felt very justified.
Yeah, I thought going into the combine, I thought this was the strongest tight end class in years. And now I'm like, after Warren and Loveland, it's a drop.
It's a pretty significant drop too.
How high, Ken? I'm interested in, and Brett is hanging on this answer. How do you feel about Tyler Warren as like a top? Like, if the Dolphins were to draft Tyler Warren at 13, what would you think?
That's a bit rich for me. I'm not anti tight end in the first round. I think drafting a tight end in the first round is perfectly fine. There's a lot of strong success stories for drafting a tight end in the first round. I don't know if Tyler Warren is the guy that I would take super high. And I'm kind of in the same way about Loveland. Definitely not Fannin. I'm not as low on Fannin after his combine performance as some people were. I posted a couple times about that, about how people are overthinking his results. They're fine. But I I'm a little shell-shocked as a Lions fan because there's only been a couple of tight ends drafted in the first round who didn't have that elite athleticism, and the Lions drafted 2 of them, and neither of them worked out. So I'm a little bit shell-shocked as a Lions fan for that. But overall, if your team needs a tight end in their offense and you're looking to get a guy that you believe can change the offense, you could do a lot worse than a guy like Warren. It's just I don't really see that day one impact. We've been spoiled the last couple of years with tight ends getting that day one impact as rookies. You don't normally see that. That is abnormal. We very rarely see that.
Just like you, I'm a Big Ten guy. So I watched a lot of Warren, and I think he's good. When it looked like the Dolphins were drafting 18, 19, 20, I was like, okay, that's cool. And I wouldn't hate getting him at 13, but the more I watch him, I hear people talking, it's the Brock Bowers effect, like you were getting into. And I'm seeing people talking about him like he's something that he's not. And Kotelnicki is such a creative offensive coordinator in college. Like Jordan's a UCF fan. He should have been the UCF head coach. He should have gotten a West Virginia job. I believe that. Kotelnicki, I have that high of opinion of him as a play designer and as an offensive coordinator.
And Brett, I will stop you and say I truly believe that if the Scott Frost thing didn't work out, it was they just couldn't pass up the opportunity to bring that back. I do think Kotelnicki would have gotten the job.
Yeah, but you look, it's just so much of it was the play design, and I don't think you can get away. Like, I think Warren has great hands. I think he uses his body well, so I think he adds to it. But especially from a Dolphin standpoint, because at the beginning of the year beginning of the draft season, I'm like, yes, would love it. But when you have Jonnu Smith and then you go out and sign Pharaoh Brown, who is going to be the main inline blocker, it's kind of hard for me to justify taking Ty Warren, who I think is the best tight end in the draft, but he's not the mismatch in the passing game that Loveland is. Or even like in some ways, I would say you could argue Fannin gives you a little more versatility. But it's just like it's just weird because as much as I like Warren, it feels like people are acting like talking about him like he's something that he isn't, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and we get that every time we have a hit in an early round, right? Or in a draft where you don't normally see it. You know, a guy like Brock Bowers coming in and being as successful as he was day one. And we've had a few guys in the last couple of years that did that. Until we see sustained production from rookie tight ends, it's just a blip, right? We have to view things as individual moments in time and then view them as trends when they become trends. Yeah. Trying to create a trend, the making fetch happen thing, you can try as hard as you want to make something happen, but if it's not a trend, then it's just not a trend. You can't make it a trend. You can't force trends. You can build on them and you can learn from the experience they have. Having a guy like Brock Bowers come out and be as successful as he was, you can look at that and be like, we can do some of those same things if we can find a player with a similar skill set, if we can call similar plays, if we can create the same type of looks that we want to get from defense. That's the functional way to look at it. But just saying draft tight end early, find success, it doesn't work that way. There still has to be that valuation aspect of evaluating a player. And again, I'm not against drafting a tight end in the first round. I'm just a bit more cautious that high. The value generally doesn't work out.
Yeah. And like I said, specifically for us, as the draft's gone on, I've gone from, and I don't want people to think I don't like Brock Bowers, but just, it doesn't make sense value-wise for us. And to kind of play off of that, the Lions are one of the only teams, and even they could do this, who are not looking for an offensive line. I think most people even have you guys taking offensive line early. It's one of those things. The Dolphins need a guard. So this is kind of a two-part question. Do you think if Armstead retires, do you think the Dolphins should roll with Patrick Paul, who they drafted in the second round, or do you think you draft a Membu if he's available or Will Campbell? Now I will preface this by saying I think Campbell is a great guard prospect. I do not like him as a tackle. So if he's there, I'd take him as a guard at 13. But I'm curious to get your opinion on those three players.
Well, I don't know how much did we see of Paul last year. Did he even
play?
He
had like 300 snaps, I think.
Yeah, so we saw a little bit, but not really enough to make that kind of evaluation. The Lions are in a similar position. We had Christian Mahogany, who was a mid-round guy that came in and did really well, but in very limited snaps. One thing you have to remember is that NFL teams don't think like fans. Like they don't think like we do. They don't go in with that Madden mindset where you're like, oh, I have a guy that's doing really good. I got to put him in so I can get his development right. Teams don't really look at it that way. They look at where guys are in their development and where they plan to have them, and they execute on those plans. And even if you think a guy did really well, maybe there's technical limitations with them and how they play. The Lions had a guy, Houston was a situational pass rusher, had a lot of really good success as a rookie, did nothing after that. He didn't develop as a run defender. He didn't add anything to his pass rushing repertoire. So teams started to catch on to what he was doing and eliminate him from the play. There has to be that development there from year to year. And if they see that from Paul, by all means, they would. I'm sure they plan on having him being a starter. They drafted him high enough that they definitely think that. But if you have a guy like Membo or Will Campbell, and there's actually a lot of guys like this in this draft where they could potentially switch inside to guard, don't let the fact that they have shorter than expected arms or they're a little bit shorter than you expect. Don't let that prevent you from putting a guy at tackle. And if he doesn't work at tackle, you can move him inside to guard. We've had plenty of players that didn't match those height and arm length conditions and still found NFL success. It's not a massive limitator that some like to make it out to be. But having a guy that can do both, or having a plan for a guy that can do both, that's just good team building. That's all that is.
Yeah.
And if you draft a guy like that and Paul ends up being the guy, sweet, you got a tackle and a guard, right? And if you draft him to play guard and Paul doesn't work out, well, maybe you can try him on the outside and see what you can do there. I don't know if Paul would move inside. He's huge, right?
I think he's more left tackle only type guy.
Yeah.
I think you're more likely to see Austin Jackson move inside than you are Paul.
Yeah. But yeah, it's good planning to try to do that kind of stuff. And this is the perfect class to have that kind of situation, really, in my opinion, to have a potential need at tackle and or guard. Just because you have a lot of guys that can do both. You have a lot of guys you could plug into one position and then have a backup plan at another position. We get a couple of guys like that every year. This year is flush with them.
Oh, that's why there's so many guys I'm like, I don't know about tackle, but guard, I really like. One of my favorite prospects is Marcus Bowe from Purdue. And like, his tape's fun to watch. And I just think having him at guard would be fun. And I just don't think he's making it to 48 for us.
Yeah, probably not.
Are there any guys in that offensive line group, specifically, for the Dolphins fans that are listening, at that guard position? I know I saw you put out that Tyler Ellsbury tested very high. And I know there are a lot of other guys in that mid-range. Are there any guys you really like kind of more in the middle tier of guard prospects?
I got to check because a lot of the guys that I'm thinking of off the top of my head they tend to be the higher up guys. For the mid-round guys, Luke Kander from Cincinnati is a guy that I like quite a bit. He tested really well, but he was on my radar before he tested. Miles Frazier from LSU, I got his testing in today. I don't remember what his score is off the top of my head. I'm pretty sure it was good though. Those are the type of guys I would look at, guys that you could potentially move around. Not even just moving from tackle to guard, but if you have a left guard or a right guard hole, you could move them from one to the other. The Lions have a pretty strong offensive line, but their depth at guard is not great. They lost Zeitler, so they have to bring in somebody to take that spot, and they haven't really filled it. That's where that Christian Mahogany comes in. But when you're looking at mid-round guys, that's what you're looking for. Not necessarily guys that are going to start right away, but guys that you can develop and put in the next year. Those are the type of guys I think that work out really well. Josh Gray from Oregon State, probably more a mid to late day 3 guy. Gus Hartwig, who didn't have elite testing, another Purdue guy, just kind of had okay testing. But he's a guy that I really liked when I got a chance to watch him. And then Drew Kendall from Boston College is another guy that I think might have a shot to actually start in a couple of years.
Sounds like every year you have a Boston College guy who just pops up as an offensive lineman.
Factory.
Yeah, just got to get that, change it to a success on the field.
Yep.
Switching defense, I know one of Brett's favorite things to talk about, and it's kind of been a hot topic recently, is the Dolphins possibly going defensive tackle at 13, whether Kenneth Grant or Walter Nolan.
Or Harmon.
Or Derek Harmon. What do you think about those 3 guys? and the possibility of them being a top 15 pick.
I'm a huge Harmon fan. I really like Harmon. And Nolan is an incredibly good prospect. He's another guy that like, it's weird that we're not talking about him more than we are. And I kind of feel that way about Harmon too, where I feel like we should be talking about those guys a lot more than we are.
I expected Kenneth Grant, and he even said it. He was aiming for a 4.9 40.
Yeah.
So I thought Kenneth Grant would test a lot better than he did too.
I'm not really so much worried about Grant's testing. I'm not as familiar with him as a prospect, despite being a Michigan dude. You figure I'd know more about those guys. But from his play style, his testing doesn't really bother me all that much. It's not like Deion Walker, right? The one, another guy that tested really poorly. His splits were really bad. And you want, as a nose tackle, yeah, you're not paying attention to every individual metric, but there's a couple individual metrics that you hope are good. And his were just really, really bad. You don't have that with Grant. His 10-yard split was fine. He didn't have a whole lot of bench reps, and he has reasonably long arms. He doesn't have like 34, 35-inch arms where you're just like, yeah, bench doesn't bother me, right? But he doesn't have short arms either. He had a good vertical, but not a good broad, which is weird. But he's 330 pounds, and he tested well. So I'm not concerned about that because you have that nose tackle build. Even if that's not where you expect him to be in the NFL, he has that same type of build, and I'm a lot less worried about his testing. He had above average testing, which if you are thinking of it as a nose tackle, that's like great testing, right? That's incredibly good testing. Yes. You really want your interior pass rushers to be the ones that have that quickness and that explosiveness. Nose tackles, you're really only looking at the broad jump and the 10-yard split, and then the other metrics are just kind of like, well, if they're good, that's a bonus.
Yeah. But yeah, you're talking about Walter Nolan too. I was expecting, that was a guy I was like, he's going to be top 15 easy come the draft time. And he just is kind of, I think he might be there, but you would expect him to get so much more hype.
Yeah, it's so weird. Like I would expect a lot more. Maybe for him it is because he didn't test. And we've only really talked about guys like Harmon and Grant and those guys that did test. Maybe that's why. But I feel like we should be talking about him more as a prospect.
Yeah. Yeah, because even then I saw, I forget who did it, but I saw a YouTube video and just watching, I'm like, people kept saying Nolan was a one-dimensional player. And I was like, that doesn't look like a one-dimensional player to me.
Dimension is good. It's the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know where this class is really sitting with that stuff. It feels odd to me. The only guy that I've really heard talked about a lot is Aeneas Peebles from Virginia Tech. His testing was good, not great. But he's an interior pass rush type of guy where he's a little bit undersized for a defensive tackle, doesn't have very long arms, and his arm length was something that people actually complained about quite a bit. But otherwise, his testing was good to okay in that kind of a range, and you usually want to be very good if you're that small. But he's like the only guy that I've really heard hyped up anywhere for the defensive tackles. It's just a weirdly quiet class. And it's a strong defensive tackle class. I feel like we have probably 5 or 6 nose tackles alone that are going to be starters in the league as early as next year. That wouldn't surprise me in the least.
Yeah, that's the thing we have discussion with in our group is a lot of people are like, yeah, the top 3, well, top 4, because you can't not include Mason Graham, but we have no shot at Mason Graham. But it's like after the top 4 guys, it's like, yeah, there's a bit of a gap, but that next level, they're all so good that I don't remember many D tackle classes being this deep. So that's one of the things. In contrast to that, this is one of the weird years where I'm like, I don't like the cornerback class or the wide receiver class that much. Corner, it seems like there is a big gap between Jahdae Barron of Texas and Will Johnson, who, I'll be honest, I think if he tests how the Michigan people are saying he's going to test, he is head and shoulders above everybody as a cornerback in this class. Just when you look, especially when you look at his film. But after those two, I like Siobhan Revel, but he's hurt. He's not getting the hype. How do you rank after the top 2? How do you rank the rest of the corners? And is this one of those weird years where it's just not? You just kind of have to look at I like Darren Porter, who's another guy, one of the few guys I think has had some hype from the combine.
Yeah, he tested one of the best all time. You'd hope he gets at least something out of that.
Yeah. So is this just one of those years where you just look at how the athletic traits and you just say we have a good defensive back coach. Let's give him someone with the raw skills and just watch him develop? Or am I just do you think I'm completely misreading this class?
No, I think that's pretty fair. You mentioned Revel, Benjamin Morrison, Trey Amos. Those are guys that I would expect to do fairly well. Azariah Thomas, I think he ran an okay 40-yard dash. He probably would have wanted a better one. But my favorite guy is still Maxwell Hairston, and I am an unabashed fan of Maxwell Hairston. I went down to the Senior Bowl, and he's one of my favorite players down there. Yeah. Super excited.
I actually had him going first round in our first mock of the year.
It would not even a little bit surprise me. He's doesn't have a first round frame, but he's got a first round everything else, in my opinion. But we've seen a couple of guys drop a little bit. Dorian Strong and Zy Alexander both had their pro days recently and didn't really do all that well. Jabbar Muhammad out of Oregon was a mid-round guy, and he tested fairly below average, and I don't think that really helped him at all, especially in a class like this. But all those guys at the top tested really, really well. Trey Amos, I don't think Morrison tested, and then Barron tested really well. So we've got a lot of guys they have the testing, they have the tape, and they're probably going to go pretty early. But if we are truly shifting away from this super pass focused offensive type of thing in the NFL, you're going to see some of the corners drop a little bit just because that's how things work in a cyclical league, right? Things change around, they move around, and we start to see people focusing on different things. The most famous example was when Randy Moss was drafted the next year. A whole bunch of people went after those big corners. That's the type of stuff that happens. The NFL is pretty reactive.
Yep. And with wide receiver, because we have to hit the elephant in the room. Travis Hunter's the first, whatever you consider him going. Can talk about him, whatever. I think his upside's higher at corner than wide receiver, but we're just going to exclude him from this conversation. Who is your number one wide receiver in this draft? Because, again, it's just one of those weird – this actually, ironically, kind of reminds me of when the Lions traded up for Jameson Williams and the Saints traded up for Chris Olave, where it seems like there's – some good wide receivers, maybe not great, at least in terms of prospects. And then you have a couple surprise people trade up and you get surprised they trade up to get someone. But after the first, after Buka and Burden and McMillan, I don't love this wide receiver class. It does seem like you're kind of just looking and hoping.
I feel like there's a lot of risk with this class where we've had a few years where it was fairly safe. There's a lot riskier picks in this class than I think we're used to seeing. Matt Golden is getting a lot of hype right now because of how fast that he ran, and he's got a lot of good tape, but what he doesn't have is a lot of tape, period, right? He doesn't have the same type of tape that everybody else has. He's not going to come in with the same level of experience. That's going to probably lead to a learning curve in the NFL. We actually saw that with Jameson Williams. He came in hurt first, but even after he got back, that wasn't an easy jump for him to go from college to pro because he was a pretty one-dimensional guy coming into the NFL. And if that's what people think of Golden, I would expect a similarly long development route for him. You're not going to be able to expect him to come in and take on every play. Jack Beck or Bay, or however you say his name, from TCU. That's a guy I don't think you have as many worries about. I think that's a much safer pick. I think he's got a better route tree, a better development pathway for him coming into the NFL. There's some concerns about his long speed. He didn't run the 40 at the combine. I don't think he did anything at the Big 12 Pro Day. He might still do something at the TCU Pro Day if they have one. But it's not a concern for me because he's really fun to watch on tape. He does a lot of really cool stuff. He's a former tight end, so he's got some of that blocking mentality when he gets out on the field. One of the bigger names that I heard a lot about was Jaden Higgins from Iowa State. He was one of the guys that got a fairly sizable bump, I feel, from the way that he performed at the combine. But we didn't get that from a lot of the other guys. Even Luther Burden didn't really get anything out of the combine. I think he only did a couple of things there. But he's a guy that put up a lot of good tape, and he did a lot of really good stuff in the drills, and we still don't really hear much about him. I feel like that might be shifting after today. I've seen a couple things today, but we don't really hear as much about him. Egbuka just had his pro day. He ran a 4.46, I think the school said. It's probably going to end up just shy of 4.5 when we get the official numbers. Ohio State is actually one of the few schools where the pro day numbers tend to be almost spot on with the combine numbers for guys that do both. I don't think there's any kind of a bump or a subtraction that you would get from that school. They've been pretty spot on the last several years. So he's probably going to run fairly close when we get the official numbers for him. That's what you wanted from him. And I feel like that's going to bump him, but he's already kind of valued where he should go in that mid to late first round. So I don't know if that's really going to affect his stock much.
Ken, I'm interested to know, and Brett named him earlier, and then we didn't touch on him. How different is it, or is there anything different that goes into the rating of Travis Hunter this year? And how do you view him as a whole prospect and then individually as a receiver or a corner?
So from a testing perspective, he didn't. So I don't have anything to say there. He just didn't test. So we're never going to get numbers for him like we did for – we can't do those fun comparisons where we jump from position to position, unfortunately. But when you have a guy that plays two positions, he's not going to do that full-time in the NFL. Hard stop. He said that he thinks he can, and I'm sure he believes that he can. I mean, he's a very competitive guy. I'm sure he believes that. It will never, ever happen in the NFL. If it ever does, it will be that year and then never again, because the amount of wear and tear that you're going to put on your body is incredible as it is in the NFL. Both of those positions are fairly physical positions. You're going to get hit and pushed around a lot. I would not expect to see anybody even try that. Whichever position he gets, whatever team he drafts, I think it's going to be very heavily dependent on whether they see him as a wide receiver or a corner primarily. And then you're going to throw him in some packages, right? You're going to have some fun goal line packages, especially lined up, where you can take advantage of that athleticism and his ability to box guys out. And you're going to use him in very unique situations down by the goal line. Maybe on third and longs, you'll come up with something fun for him to do. But if you're playing him as a corner, that's probably all you're doing at wide receivers, a couple of plays here and there. If you see him as a wide receiver, you're going to throw him in at cornerback on a couple of plays just to see, to give the defense or the offense a different look. You're going to say, well, I'm going to put this big old guy on one of your smaller guys, or you got a big guy, I'm going to put a big guy on him for a little bit. But it'll only be for a couple of plays out of a series. It won't be for the entire time, because you don't want to put that kind of pressure on a player to perform. It's just too much wear. It's too much wear on a guy to do that. It's asking way too much of him. I don't think we see that. But whether it's one or the other, it's just going to be whichever team drafts him. I wish I had an easy answer for it, but.
So I don't know how you feel, but I feel like it's a lot easier for him to be a corner who plays a couple packages at receiver than being a receiver who plays a couple packages at corner.
I think it's just easier to get production at wide receiver. If you have a team that if you build enough chemistry with your quarterback, anybody's going to get passes. The Lions literally signed Matthew Stafford's roommate from college at one point, and he got a whole bunch of targets he shouldn't have gotten. Right? Kelvin Benjamin had a 1,000-yard season where it was just them feeding him because they had nobody else to throw the ball to. It's very easy to get some kind of artificial production out of a wide receiver. It's impossible to do that at cornerback.
Yes.
You're either a good corner or you're a bad corner. There's no way to pad that in any way. And it's easier to play a difficult position and then jump into a position where you can scheme things
100%.
Than it is to do it the other way around. It's easier to draw up plays for a wide receiver in packages than it is to draw up plays for a corner or a safety in a couple of packages. Yes. Maybe not for safety. There's a couple of coaches I think could do a lot of really fun stuff with safeties. Aaron Glenn just went over to the Jets as their head coach. I think he could do some fun stuff with a safety. He likes
most of the people from the Ravens.
Oh yeah,
coaching staff they do.
Exclude the Ravens. We have to exclude them from most creativity and draft conversations.
But now they're all getting head coaching jobs or going to other defensive coordinator positions. So.
Well, even like you're talking about, that guy's never going to fall to me. That happens almost every year to the Ravens. You're like, no way that guy falls.
Them and the Steelers.
It's going to be the Ravens. Like
or the Steelers. Those are the two teams. It's like, oh, this player fell, going to take him. It's how it's always been.
That's the way it is, man.
Speaking of safeties, which of the two safety? I don't think the Dolphins are taking safety in round one, but you have two that are probably top 20 players in Malachi Starks and Nick Emawari. How do you rate those two?
There's a fairly significant difference in athleticism there. Safety is not a position that I feel like you have to overplay the athleticism part, right? It's not a position where you go, oh, this has to be an elite athlete. If you have a guy that has a lot of really good tape and just kind of okay metrics, you're usually okay. I've even talked a couple times about a specific type of safety where they have a poor 40, but a very good 10-yard split. And then they either have elite explosiveness or elite agility. Those type of guys tend to find success in the NFL, regardless of where they're drafted. Malachi Starks doesn't really have that. He doesn't really have that pickup to his stats. He only really has the one, I think it was his 10 split was the only thing that was really good. And the rest of it was pretty pedestrian. That's not great. But he's got a lot of really good tape. And if you feel like you want to bring a guy like that in and you feel like that fits your defense, that's great. It's a lot like Brian Branch in terms of value. I've seen him compared as players because they both tested kind of mediocre. They are not similar players, in my opinion. But they are similar in how they should be valued. I don't really view Starks as a guy that is a surefire top of the first round talent, that top 10, top 15 guy that he was billed to be. I don't really see him that way. I think that's a guy you're going to hear falling on draft day. But what's really happening is just teams are picking him where he probably should. The teams that are looking for that guy are the ones that are going to pick him, and those guys are going to be later. Emawari's got a little bit more going for him because he was already a well thought out prospect before he tested incredibly well. So he comes in with both the tape and the athleticism. I feel that's a safer pick. I think that athleticism also puts him in a range where teams are going to think he can do more. So more teams are going to value him highly than they will with Starks, because some teams are going to look at Starks and think of those as limitations, things that he can't do. You want to look at what a guy can do. And if they don't think he can do all the things they need, they're going to look at a guy they think can. And that's where that distinction is going to start to show up.
So it sounds like you have Emawari a little above Starks.
Yeah, I did before. They were pretty closely ranked for me originally, though. I think in our sim, we had Starks in the top 10, and then Emawari was in the top 20, like between 10 and 20. But for me personally, I really liked Emawari. So
that's one of Jordan's guys. So I can see him already grinning.
And I call it the "Hey There, Delilah" effect. Is you know something before everybody else, and then it's on the radio every other song, and you're like, "Oh, you can't say you like it anymore."
Yeah, and just because I see it, what do you think of Makuba?
I don't really have enough knowledge of him as a player to really speak on him too much. Unfortunately, I mentioned before the broadcast I was doing some health stuff. I didn't get started on my draft prep until the combine had started. Like it was already starting.
Yeah,
a lot of catch up.
Yeah, and of course everybody knows you came up with the RAS and a position that, as you like to call him last year, the Rassholes love for that is the edge. Now, again, just looking at film, he didn't test because of his shoulder. Abdul Carter, I think it's probably. I don't think anybody's debating he's number one.
I don't think anybody's going to argue that.
Now, I think number two, to me, if it wasn't for some pretty glaring red flags, I think Mike Green would be my number two.
Maybe. I really like Mike Green. I'm not as concerned. I know people were concerned about his hand size and his arm length at one point. Not a concern for me. I really like James Pierce. I think he's a really good prospect. Michael Williams is a guy I think is got a lot of stuff going for him. I'd love to sit here and sing about Shamar Stewart's praises because he has that 10. I did compare him in terms of production and athleticism to Daniil Hunter because that's the same exact situation that he went through, but he went in the third round. People are talking up Stewart like he's a very high first rounder, and he might go that high, but I don't think that he's going to get that immediate production that you really want. I'm a pretty big Nick Skouerten fan. I think he's a really good player. I'm fairly high on the edge class overall. Green also has some potential character risks to him. Yeah. He brought those up at the combine, I believe. I don't know where that stuff is going to land. I don't want to try to posit on it. But it's a fairly deep class. And even guys like Princey Uman Milan, who doesn't have like those ridiculous measurables or that ridiculous tape where he's got that thing that he's so good at. You know, he doesn't have a Dwight Freeney spin move or whatever. But he's good enough at everything that you can see him having an immediate role in the NFL. You can see him going to a team that needs a 5-tech or a 3-4 edge and starting from day one and being fairly productive from day one. A lot of guys like that, where at the very least you see them being productive as pros. Kyle Kennard from South Carolina is another good example. What's his name from
Josiah Stewart, Michigan.
Yeah, not Josiah Stewart, although he's another guy in that same kind of vein.
Look at Brett. Any opportunity that Brett gets to just yell out the name of a random Michigan player. Brett,
hey, that's not a random Michigan player. That is a top 60 player. Well,
any chance. He could have said any position, and you were just going to scream. He listed 8 running backs, and I had to mutter R.J. Harvey under my breath.
I didn't mention Donovan Edwards, so you're not going to. I like the kid, but I don't need the player on my team anymore. So, but yeah, no, I agree. The edge class is very good. It almost makes you regret taking Chop Robinson in round 1 last year.
So I said that. I said that. I love Chop Robinson. I think he's a great player. But I think that if you could reverse it and take that guard prospect last year, or take a play like a corner like Quinyon Mitchell last year, and then take one of those edges this year, I would have felt a lot better than taking Chop and then a corner this year.
Just how things change. We also didn't think Cam Smith was going to be
that all changes if Will Johnson is there at 13.
Yeah, and you only know what you know, right? We didn't know this class was going to be this strong in that area, and generally you don't get back-to-back classes where you have a strong edge class and then a strong edge class. I feel like we've been kind of spoiled in that regard for a couple of years in a row, but those have to end eventually, right? You can't bank on it being every year.
Yep. So, as we're reaching the hour mark, I'll let Jordan ask if Jordan has another question. I'll give him the floor as much as he wants. The last question I have, and the thing I'm getting into, we're talking about how we've been talking this whole time about how we're not talking about enough people. If you're talking to NFL GMs and you're going to bang the table for any player this year, and they're not getting the attention really, because like no one is as of right now, who is your player that you're banging the table on saying you have to draft this guy?
So I already mentioned Hairston and I mentioned Tootin. So those are my 2 guys that I don't feel are getting enough love and probably should. Damian Martinez is one of my favorite prospects, like power prospects, in a while. I got to see him down at the Senior Bowl, and like I said, I was coming in fairly blind to a lot of these players. I don't have the level of preparation I normally do. And Martinez struck me the moment I saw him on the field, not just because of his size, but how imposing he was and the way that he runs. The way that he carries himself, how explosive he was when he moved. Tootin had that exact same thing. Tootin's so sudden when he moves. It's ridiculous how quickly he goes from 0 to 100 miles an hour. He just fumbles a lot, and that's going to be a concern for a lot of people. Martinez doesn't really have that big of a concern there. You might have some concern over his top end speed. He's fast enough for a guy that size and that type of play style. Not really concerned about speed at all. I wanted him to be explosive. He was explosive, and he looks like it on tape. He's a guy that more people should be talking about. The Lions had David Montgomery last year, and they're going to be looking for a David Montgomery replacement eventually. And if that's the guy, I will literally celebrate. I will celebrate in the middle of the draft when I'm supposed to be working, just because it's such a good move. But somebody's going to get a good player with him.
Okay. Who do you think is going to win March Madness?
I have no idea. I don't know what the other ball sports are like or anything that goes on with them.
That is a question I am interested in knowing. Do you think that what you built can be used in other sports, or do you think it is specific to football and only football?
So I think it can be used in other sports. The reason I haven't done it is I have zero passion for other sports. I have no interest in any other sport at all. Not even passing interest, none. You got to have passion for it. You have to love it. You have to care for it. You have to spend a lot of time on it. I don't know that we would ever have enough data for college basketball or for basketball to be able to use it. Because there's fewer players on the field on the court, you're going to have a smaller number of players in your data set. RAS requires a fairly high amount of data to be effective as a tool. And I don't know that you'll get that with basketball. I know there's a lot of colleges and there's a lot of players and there's fewer positions, right? So maybe, but and they also test. Availability of data is the other thing. I know that the NBA has a lot of data from recent years. I don't know how far back that goes. I think there's something there that could be researched by somebody who gives a damn about basketball. I've had some people reach out and ask me about it, and I've gladly given up as much information as I can about how to get started. Nothing's really came of that. It requires a lot of attention to be able to do it. Hockey is one that has come up a couple of times, and there's a little bit more volume in terms of per team, but I don't know that it's got enough data, collectible data, to be able to put that together.
All right, so you opened Pandora's box, by the way, because you said that your passions are not really those other sports. What are, outside of football, Kent Lee Platte's passions? What is film? What are you passionate
music,
about?
Video games, writing, reading. I love a lot of stuff. They used to call him a Renaissance man when you do art and science and all that crap. I love doing that stuff, but I'm not good enough at any of those things to like do anything with it. I love film. I talk about film fairly often. I watched about 400 movies last year. I will probably watch close to that this year. I've watched a lot of TV shows. I'm able to split my attention fairly easily. So I can do my work and then be watching a movie and not miss out on the movie. I love music, lots of different genres. I've actually been listening to a bunch of Irish folk music the last couple of days. I introduced my son to the Dubliners, both Luke Kelly's original stuff and some Ronnie Drew. One of my favorite quotes of all time across anything was one of the original articles about the Dubliners. Referred to Ronnie Drew's voice as sounding the sound that you get when a pebble is stuck under a doorway. And I've always just loved that mental image because it's correct. If you've ever heard Ronnie Drew sing, it's 100% correct. But whoever thought that comparison up, it deserves an award.
Kent, I have two more very important questions for you. Number one, what is your favorite flavor of Gatorade?
Blue, probably.
Light blue? Well, you got a couple different blues. Are we talking
light blue? Yeah, the light blue one. I'm okay with dark blue. I like the light blue one. Yeah, I don't like the red ones in general.
All right.
I like grape everything, but grape's boring, right?
It is a little boring. And I think if you were to put out a poll, I think grape would definitely be on the lower end of the scale.
Nobody wants to say. Everybody is okay with grape. Nobody wants grape.
And then last question, you're going on a road trip. You walk into a gas station. What snack are you getting from the inside of the gas station?
Probably the cheddar and sour cream chips. Nice. I usually grab those when I'm on the road.
Nice.
I also get the berry, little worm, gummy worm thing.
The gummy worm guy. Smart guy.
Oh,
yes. Yeah, I like a sweet and then a little chocolate in there. I'm a sucker for a little Reese's Fast Break.
Love fast breaks. I don't take them. I don't do any chocolate on road trips though. Chocolate kind of messes with my stomach when I'm in the car for a long time.
Oh no, that keeps me energized.
That's my sitting at home working snack.
Yeah. Yeah, this last couple of minutes just has me thinking like, okay, who's going to play Kent Lee Platte when they make the RAS movie? You had Brad Pitt and Moneyball. Who's going to be you in a movie?
Whoever can grow the best natural mustache. It cannot be fake. It has to be real.
Wow.
I don't know who that is because not enough people wear cool mustaches.
All right, so if you want to play Kent Lee Platte in a movie, start growing your mustache right now.
Yep. Well, Kent, thank you for your time. Everybody listening, thank you for joining us. If you're not following Kent on Twitter, it is at MathBomb, and you are doing yourself a disservice if you are not following him. Kent, just like last year, thank you for joining us. And hope the rest of the draft season is easy for you and it's fun as always. Hopefully we start getting a little more little more stuff to talk about because, like, yeah, it's just kind of been a boring draft season, and it's weird to
start
it feels
start
like
manufacturing it. I'll start finding some controversies. Restrepo didn't test well. Here's all the things about 4.8 wide receivers.
Yeah.
We'll try to manufacture some stuff here, and it's not making it up out of thin air. It's just finding something to talk about. We just need to get things churning.
Yeah, no, we definitely do.
I got a text from my girlfriend in the peanut gallery that Sam Elliott would be the guy that plays you in a movie.
That's actually a good choice.
I don't know that I could get my voice low enough. I've got a fairly low voice, but not that smooth, man. I don't sound like I just drank whiskey every time that I talk, you know.
That is a good choice though. But all right, everybody, thank you for joining us. Kent, thank you. Hope everybody has a great rest of the week and a great weekend.
Thanks, Kent.
Thanks, everybody.
Appreciate
you guys.
Appreciate you.
Later.